Welcome to The Next Chapter, a show about how to move your life forward and what comes next. I'm your host, Carrie Pena. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Pena, and this is The Next Chapter podcast. With me in studio today, Matt Gottesman, a gentleman who I've been wanting to have on the show for a long time. Many titles, but we don't love titles, but I'll just tick off a few of them. So you've launched successful startups. You're a digital creator, a writer, entrepreneur. You've had a lot of success, and you've also seen success vanish in front of you. So we're talking today about harnessing the power of our own intuition. And I love this subject. So thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me on here. And intuition, resilience, I think we were talking about that too. So happy to dive into all the things.
I want to set the scene for the audience to talk a little bit about kind of when your life, sorry for this phrase, but kind of crashed and burned.
Yeah.
No way around that. And how you have managed to build back up success, but in a different way over the last few years.
Well, and it's interesting. I feel like you can have multiple variations of that. You can have the main one that really hurts bad, where it feels like your whole world crashes down. And at the time, it really can feel that way. Like you're like, everything is just in an instant gone.
Yeah.
Until time goes on and you realize like, no, actually it's not. You've been removed. Like things were being redirected for you.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience to actually see that, versus when you're going through it and you feel like your life's over, and then of course, along the way, change is inevitable. It's always happening. But I feel like it helps us deal with the changes faster and faster and faster. And they feel like a little bit less disastrous and more contained as you continue to, to pivot, because we're always pivoting. And I think that's one of the most important things I want people to know, is that we're not ever stuck to one thing. And we're constantly evolving from these things, from the things that we're going after, the things we're called to, the things that no longer serve us. I mean, whatever it is. We're always evolving, right?
And I want to give some frame of reference. So you went through, you speak publicly about all of this. So I'm not trying to dive into your personal business, but you went through a divorce and also a bit of a career crisis, kind of all in the same time frame.
Yeah. Well, a couple things happened. Looking back, and this is where I think the intuition comes in. I asked for it, even though at the time I didn't think I was asking for it. Meaning, I was sitting and praying, and I was like surrendering to God at that moment. I'm like, you know what? Well, the first one was, I was reading in a book, you're the average of the 5 people you're around. And professionally at the time, I did not like that. And the moment I asked for God's help like that, the next day, they were being removed one by one. All the contracts, everything, even though I did a great job, made them the product they wanted, got them the leads that they wanted, helped make the money for the sales, all these things didn't matter. Just like that, they were being removed. And at first that freaked me out, because, that's also these contracts. I was a digital consultant, for these brands. And it's really like taking your business and how do you do all the things digitally, back end, front end. And so that was going away. And then still have my marriage. And, at the time, she was very supportive of always just going after, what makes most sense. And several months later, there was some hiccups, and there was some things behind the scenes for some time, and it led to divorce. And so, as we were talking previously, I was on the way back from Europe with my parents. We were coming back early. We went as 4, we came back as 3. And my father challenged me. And he was like, well, I love you, and, this is a tough situation you're in. And, he's like, which way do you think it's going to go? And we were having a discussion about it. And he gave me this beautiful gut check of like, I love you, but you're going to have to, start running your race for you. And you're going to have to start building the world in which you want to see. You're always taking care of everybody, always taking care of everything else. And he's like, that's great, but let it be a byproduct of, your better self, like of the world in which you can create, versus depleting yourself and, and all these things.
Run your race.
Yeah. That's what he said. He's like, I want you to run your race. Like God put you in it, because he did. And I was like, and my father was one of my best friends and mentors. He passed in 2019, and he always had this, it didn't matter whatever it was that I wanted to do. He didn't just, support me out of like, just, let me support. He'd actually go learn it, figure out what it was. And he would get me when like everybody else thought I was crazy. Hence, like I even like put it on, it's like people will think you're, when you have your own ideas and you want to take your own path. And he'd be like, that's a good idea. Like, let me look into that, And so he was very encouraging out of like, think for yourself, be very independent.
And listen to your own intuitive nature.
Constantly. You got to trust yourself.
So let's talk about that pivot. So, you don't just build back up after all that happens.
No.
Like, you lose all your clients and then you and your wife split up.
Yeah.
And talk about, because this is something really important to me when I do these interviews. It's not easy.
No.
You're a smart guy, you're a digital creator, you're an awesome writer, you have a big social media following, but it's not easy to rebuild from that. So what steps did you take?
Well, first, I sought out people that, spiritual mentors. I can't play the victim role. I wanted to get to know myself. What happened was I looked at myself and I said, all right, it doesn't matter if I caused something, didn't cause something, I'm in this situation. I'm a common denominator here. And I want to learn how I got here and what I can do different because I don't want to go through this again. Mm. And so I sought out business mentors, spiritual mentors, all kinds of people that I admired more for how they were living their life, their morals, their integrity, and just I wanted to get to know myself, at a very fundamental core versus just simply, I didn't want to repeat any of this. If anybody that goes through anything major, the last thing you want to do is like work through it only to get, end up back where.
That's right. Yes.
You know what I mean? So there was a little bit of that. And then I wrote as therapy. So behind the scenes, I was a writer, whether it was writing for myself or writing marketing campaigns, business plans, doing all the things for all these brands, whatever it might be. I was always writing. And I said, you know what? I want to take to the internet. I want to write. I want to talk about mental wellness and I want to talk about relationships and entrepreneurship and like the reality versus the glamorization that media sometimes portrays. Mm-hmm. They always give like the end result, like so-and-so did this and, somebody sold this $50 million business. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but what about everything that led up to that? Correct. What about what they go through? Right. And so writing for me was like therapy as well. And it was a place I just didn't have to think. And what happened was that started growing communities online. And
big communities. I mean, you have hundreds of thousands of followers.
Yeah.
But you had a bit of an imposter syndrome going on in calling yourself a writer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And interestingly, thank God for a community and for also my tight circle for constantly reminding me like, no, you're a writer. It's like, yeah, but I'm also these other things, It's like, no, but you're a writer. You're a writer.
I love that. And I love that you talk about that. And so as you started to dig deep on yourself.
Yeah.
And not be a victim, but really figure out, like you said, you're the common denominator here in some one way or another.
Yeah.
What did you learn about yourself in that process?
I mean, you're going to be all right. You're always going to be all right. You're going to come to a reality. You're going to come to a crossroads where you're going to really like have to ask yourself what you want. And you're going to have to like look at every single aspect of your life and work on it like in a very detailed manner. Like you actually have to take, it's all self-awareness. Everybody's like looking for something external to validate, like to make a move, to do their art, to do a job, to take a path. And it's all internal. Like you already know what you need to do, but it's that constant resistance that you're always like working through,
Yes.
And so
because there's a lot of fear baked in the cake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think a lot of that also just kind of comes from, living in society and in a modern world where we haven't been taught to take our own path that resonates both intuitively from a gut feeling and then from the discipline and execution of doing it. It's always been like, these are your safe paths. These are the things you should do. This is what's respectable. This is where, the money is. This is where this safety is, all these things. Is it? Is it safe? Is it so safe? Is the money always there?
And
do
are
you feel
happy?
good? And are you happy? And And then you get a lot of people say, oh, well, if you always did what you're happy. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. There are two paths, I believe, in doing hard work. There's hard work for what you're connected to, and there's hard work for what you are not connected to. And it's interesting because a lot of people have chosen paths that they're not connected to. They do very hard work and they think about starting over for the things that they want. And they look at that hard work and they go, no way. I'm like, yeah, but you're associating two different types of hard work. Because hard work for something that you just feel so connected to and that will make you happy, it is like running your Olympic gold medal run. It is way different.
Yes.
You almost can't be pulled away from it for anything. In fact, you learn a different pace of a marathon. It's more like you have to, the discipline of putting the thing down and taking breaks and getting rest and doing healthier activities, because otherwise you'll work yourself to overwhelm over there too, for the thing, because you love it so much.
When did you start to see that what you were doing was working? So you're starting to build up this following, you're writing about things that you're connected to, some of your own life lessons. So intuitively you're feeling, okay, this is working. And then people are responding to you.
Yeah.
And did you have a moment where you're like, okay, this is all coming together?
Yeah, several, and it kept changing. The first part was I knew I wanted to build an online presence as well too, because I wanted to show, I saw where the trend was. I mean, this is going back in 2014. And a lot of times I would consult with these businesses around digital and they'd say like, well, how do you know it works? So after a while you realize like you have to do it yourself, because you have to be the model that you're trying to also pitch to somebody else. Like, oh yeah, well, how did you do it?
Right.
How did you do it? And so there was that aspect. The second thing is I knew that you can redefine business and culture when you have an audience, and I saw where we were heading for that. And I knew that I wanted to redefine also how media was done, because it, yeah.
It's okay, you can say it. I know you're saying, people are like, well, she's a news person, so we're
I mean, you know how the media world has historically been, and and I knew that social and podcasting and everything was going to change the game. And so I knew I wanted to do a media company. And then along the way, I was still consulting. But obviously as things were growing, that is your proof. And then in the consulting, I eventually turned it into a digital agency, which I said I would never do a digital agency. Never. I never thought I would do one, just because I used to audit them. I used to be on the brand side, and I used to look at agencies and, brands would be like, are they taking us for money? I'm like, yeah, pretty much, And so I created one after my father, around the time my father was passing in 2019, 2020. And I did that for several years and I burnt out yet again. So it's funny how, again, things are working, but then you reach new levels where maybe they're not working as much for you. You don't know what you don't know.
You can't be afraid to pivot.
Constantly.
That's the thing that I think when you want to work at a certain level and find joy in the work and in your life, you can't be afraid to pivot.
Right. And it's interesting too. So the joy part is very interesting. We can be in love with the things that we do, but sometimes we can fall out of love out of neglect. Not that it's no longer serving us. It may still serve us. But if we're burning out, if our energy is being displaced in the wrong places, if we're giving it out too much more than we're replenishing, if we're not doing the right activities within the work that we want to be doing, we can burn out. And sometimes people will think like, oh, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And you're like, is it that you don't want to do the art, like the thing that the mastery of the things that you love, or how you're doing them and for who?
Right. Yes.
And those are very, very different paths.
Yes.
And that's what happened just even 2 years ago, where the agency was great. It was growing and we had a lot of clients, and I burned out yet again. And I was like, you know what? I'd like to be the main client now. And I would like to do all of these activities that I love doing, from the digital and the marketing and the branding and the growth marketing and the media and all that stuff, but for a greater mission that I felt called to, including the writing. And
so to explain what it is you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, I'm building a publishing company, essentially, which won't just be podcasts, but I'm doing my own books, but then making it also potentially available for publishing other people's as well. Yes. So that's exciting. And then I threw in apparel as well.
Yes.
And then having a lot of distribution, if you will, when you have a large audience, you can actually bring the spotlight to other people's missions, other people's products, other people's companies. And so having also essentially a venture arm where it allows other really great purpose-driven initiatives to come through my channels as well too. So
how do you feel sitting here today talking about your journey, the ups and downs, and what you've learned? How do you feel sitting in your skin today?
It's the happiest I've ever been, really. And I grew up a pretty happy dude. I grew up pretty happy in just my family and friends, and I feel very fortunate. It's the happiest and healthiest I've felt ever, because I put such an emphasis on the mind, the body, and the soul the most. Like having that, constantly working on the health, constantly working on gut health, and constantly working on nutrition and movement and exercise and writing and creativity and discipline and all of these things combined. I now do more in less time. I have more time for family and friends, and I feel like it's more grounded. It feels more rooted in joy, and things still come up. I always love people knowing, like, listen, life is happening all the time.
Yes.
But you feel differently as it's happening. Like you feel like, you know what? I got this. Like we'll figure it out. You move through things a little bit. What's the expression? Things don't get easier. You just get better.
Yeah.
Right.
So what does your next chapter look like?
Well, I'm working on publishing my very first book for me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Because you're a writer.
Because I'm a writer. I'm a writer. And it's been a long time coming. I've actually been working on it for about 2 years. And, most of the content's already there. I'm just now pulling it all together. And I'm now in the next stage of growing my podcast. And I just recently launched the first collection of my apparel line, which went really well. It was in April and May.
Congratulations. What does your shirt say?
This one says, "It's crazy before it's genius."
I love it.
Yeah. So
it's funny because when I left local news to start Inspired Media 360, I did content creation and production, and I always just felt something inside me was following along also with, the digital aspects of media. Plus, I believe very strongly in creating positive media and doing deeper level journalism. And people were like, "You're leaving at the top of your game." I'm like, that's precisely why. Right. That is why I'm doing it. I feel it. I know it. And I went with my own intuition when I know a lot of people were like, "She's nuts."
Well, and there's always your next mountain. We get to the top of one, but there's always another one. And that's why we also have to pace ourselves constantly, and I love also the day and age that we live in now. As a writer, I wanted to, what are all the mediums in which we can communicate the messaging and the things that we feel called to do? That's why it wasn't just really meant to be apparel. It was actually meant to be like, hey, how do we take a message and have other people wear it with the same energy, like to remind them it has nothing to do with like the creator as much as the person wearing it as well. And
it's intentionality with our words. What are we putting out into the world?
Yeah.
What message do you want to leave the audience with who might be listening to you, inspired by your story, and trying to think about how they could start their own next chapter, run their own race?
The number one thing I tell people often is, you actually do know what you feel called to do. You do know more than you're giving yourself credit for. You know what to do next. You know the things that you quote unquote should be doing. And you have to really trust that voice. You have to have a relationship with that voice. You have to practice it every single day. I think that's a difficult thing, and I totally get it, because trusting ourselves is like, is it fear or is it, I had somebody actually ask me online once, he was like, "How do you know if it's fear or if it's God?" I was like, "That's a fair question." He goes, "Well, how do you figure it out?" I was like, when I ask something that I need to know, like when I ask God, it's like that, the answer is like that. And he's like, "Is it what you want to hear?" I'm like, "Mostly not." He's like, "How do you know if it's fear?" I was like, when I try to negotiate, and what I gave him as an example is sort of like, you always kind of know intuitively whether something feels aligned or not. You always know, like, you can feel if something you should, take part in that business deal, or maybe, the relationship or whatever. But you kind of know.
Yeah.
You do know. And he asked me, he's like, "So how do you figure it out?" I was like, "I practice every single day." And he's like, "How often do you listen to God?" I'm like, and this is a few years ago. And I was like, "I'm learning. I haven't been doing that as well." And he goes, "How do you practice it?" And I said, "Well, it's very simple. I if I go in the opposite direction, I do it with intentionality. I'll take that business lunch. I'll listen. I'll see if it feels right. If I can't tell, I'll take another business lunch. And he's like, do you ever keep going in the opposite direction? I said, sometimes I do, yeah. And he said, what do you do if you've gone too far away from where your intuition told you? And I was like, the good news is you're always one step to the right back to where you should have been. So you have, like, trusting yourself is a practice. And I think that's what I want people to know, is that, like, you have to take time practicing it. And so now, like, when I hear that voice, or when I connect in, if I hear it, like, I'm listening to it as best as I can, like, instantly.
And how proud do you think your dad is of you? Because I know that
I feel
was
him all
your
the time.
guy.
I feel, I stayed connected to my father since he passed, every single day. And I feel him all the time. And sometimes it's cool when certain things happen. I'm like, I know that was you. Like, I know that was you, And then other times I can literally feel his presence and his, so we stay very connected, and I try to talk to him often.
Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story in hopes of inspiring others. And I know you're all over, but just to make it easy on folks, where can they find you?
I mean, the easiest is Instagram at Matt Gottesman, because that'll lead to all the other links.
Do you answer people when they write you?
I do. Yep. I answer all the DMs. Yeah.
And you get a lot of them.
I get a lot of them. I do.
Matt, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Me.
And thanks to all of you for listening and watching. I'm Carrie Pena, and this is The Next Chapter.